Okay, I think we're ready to start, so I'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to a special podcast episode of Excellence in Childcare. Today, we're going to be covering our 2024 Compliance and Risk Survey. I'm Cindy Vian, Vice President of One Place Childcare Operations in North America, and your host for today. And we have some incredible guests joining us. I couldn't be more grateful that they all were willing to take some time out of their day to spend with us and talk about compliance and risk management. So please join me in welcoming to the podcast Vernon Mason, author, trainer, and Senior Vice President of Growth and Development at the Nest Schools, and just all around most humorist, keynote speaker, bar none, probably. Julie Roy, entrepreneur, coach, and childcare business guru, author, and just extraordinary wealth builder. Rachel Supalla, an early childhood consultant and founder of Discovery Kids Zone, operating 8 locations at the same time in Montana. And then Lynn Wenger, founder and president of the Compliance Alliance. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Cindy.
Hello. Thank you.
So today what we thought we might do was to dive in with these experts. They helped us to create the compliance survey that we recently published. And so just kind of as some background, we believe in contributing towards an enhancement of standards in our industry. And we therefore are delighted to present a 2024 Compliance and Risk Survey report. And this podcast is going to allow us to go a little bit deeper into the findings. So first, we're going to start off with a poll, everyone. So how would you rate the importance of compliance and risk management buy-in within the early learning and childcare organizations, from very high to very low?
Very high.
Very high.
Very high.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So I think we're all rating it as very high. Let's go a little bit deeper and engage in a more in-depth conversation about the ratings that we're seeing from the survey. So one of the things that we saw in the survey was around systems and tools. And 32% of the respondents noted that their organization did not have systems or tools to manage compliance and risk. And so let's just kind of go around the room and let everybody kind of chime in on that.
Well, I think that that's exactly right. Most people don't have systems and tools in place, and the ones that do have them in place are not using them, right? And are not, as my friend Carol Gatewood says, if you don't inspect it, it doesn't get done, right? You have to inspect what you want to have, what you want to get accomplished.
I think it really stands out when you start to grow and acquire new schools, because you can't duplicate your systems and process. You may have it at one place, but if you're not, keeping up with those and having those systems of accountability to make sure that they're being carried out, when you acquire other centers or grow, that's when you really crash and burn if you don't have those systems in place.
And I see
Yeah, I
also
agree.
to piggyback on that, a lot of it can be in the heads of either tenured people or in the owners. And it's not so much that they don't necessarily have the processes, but they may not be well documented. And then to go hand in hand with that, not well communicated. So part of it is they may be doing things intuitively, but the discipline of having it documented and communicated is kind of like that first step, and then the systems fall in line behind a well-documented process.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. And I think that there is a big difference, like Rachel was pointing out. It's one thing to be compliant with one location, but as you grow and scale, or you're aiming toward maybe exiting, and Julie, you might want to chime in there. If you're planning to exit your business, how does this kind of set you up for success, let's say?
Yeah, absolutely. So all of, what Vernon, Lynn, and Rachel have said are all contributing factors to a successful exit. I would say There's also one piece we didn't mention, but it's worth mentioning, is the training and sustainability of those compliance procedures, because we oftentimes as owners decide we're going to have all these compliance procedures, and we get all of these guidelines written up in handbooks, and like people read them but they don't really read them, right? And so, and even if you're reading them, what's the KPI or metric to ensure that these are actually getting done? And so I feel like a lot of times throughout the scaling process, we get folks at 10 locations, but their house of cards starts falling in, right? And so it's really important to have along the way those KPIs, those metrics, that accountability, the sustainability of whatever you're putting in place. I think as owners, we like to do a lot, but sometimes we don't have that buy-in. And so it's important along the way to ensure that you're not dragging people with you. You're actually having them be part of the process and help you, coin those guidelines.
Yeah, I think you just nailed it on the head, and I think everyone here on the panel would agree. But I'd love for each of you to just chime in on that. How do you get that buy-in, right? We all know that they're going to get initial training on licensing compliance, but then how do you build that into a culture of compliance? So could you go just a little bit deeper there? What else would you share?
I mean, it's all about, it's not just the systems and the processes, but it's the systems of accountability. How are you keeping track of, like Julie said, the KPIs are what is getting done, and that everybody in your company has those KPIs so they know what they should be doing. They're being scored on it. You're looking back at those scores. You're using those scores and that data to help improve the processes in your system and in your program. And as you scale and grow or get ready for an exit, what are the KPIs that I now need to put in place, and who are going to make those get carried out, and how are we going to score them? How are we going to keep track of that? And what is the process for all of that? That's what has to happen. And that's a lot of times we have systems and processes, but we don't have the people or the compliance to go along how we're maintaining those processes.
Yeah.
It looked like you had
I would
something to
say
share,
that.
or Vernon?
Sorry, Julie.
Yeah.
I would say that I'm one of my core beliefs is getting buy-in from your people, and it starts with getting input. I would say anybody who's working on this, because we also know that it's a living, breathing document. It's not a once, one and done. I would say getting input from the people, from the stakeholders, from the people who are going to live it. If you're having procedures, having input from those people who are actually performing the procedures rather than sitting in your office and chat GTPing it. Wonderful. Chat GTP is wonderful to do it, right? Maybe you take everything they give you, dump it into chat GTP to give you something that's legible out of it. But getting input from the stakeholders gives them some influence, but inherently gives them some buy-in. I also would say in today's workforce, there needs to be some incentive for completion and for the continuation and to maintain, sustain a level. No longer do people do things because it's in their job description or because someone told them to do it. They need to understand the big picture. It's kind of like the story of, the people who visited NASA and ran into a janitor in the hallway and they said, "Sir, what do you do here?" And he said, "I help put men in space, or I help put people in astronauts in space," I think is what he said. And so getting the why behind it is
Yes.
really important. And I also would say layers of compliance, right? The new director can't go around and spend their time being an inspector, right?
Mhm.
So we have to pass down some of the responsibility, some of the ownership into lead teachers and education coordinators and facility coordinators and things like that. So everybody has their area of expertise and everybody is overseeing things and not one person being held responsible for all of it.
I think to add to what Vernon said, it's important that the compliance also builds. So the lead teacher's, compliance is based on how well the assistant teacher is doing, because then that puts in that layer of accountability for how we're training and how we're mentoring and coaching all the way up, the line to director, assistant, regional director, all the way. So that compliance level is just constantly building.
Rachel, would you like to share like an example? Because I think what you're saying here is really, truly important. And it's one of the things that I think a single location owner and director might be struggling with is how do I build in those layers and kind of have all of the team buy in and hold each other accountable? Can you give any kind of an example of that?
So one example would be, is your shelves labeled? That's something that, like something simple, like the shelves labeled in the classroom. And that's something that would be on a lead teacher's responsibility, but their responsibility is also to teach the assistant teacher how to label the shelves. So it would be on their scorecard. Did you also teach your assistant teacher how to label their shelves? Then the director's scorecard would also say, are the shelves in all of the classrooms labeled? So it just builds like that. And then the regional director would say, are all the classrooms labeled how they need to be labeled? So it just builds and builds and builds so that every expectation that you have within your company, within each location, a lot of people are working to make sure that all of those expectations and that compliance is met.
Yeah, that's perfect. That was wonderful. Lynn, it looked like you had something to add in there. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to mention from the Compliance Alliance perspective, we're seeing that compliance needs a little bit of a PR job. And what I mean by that is a lot of times compliance is perceived as punitive if we don't do. So if we look at compliance of what are you moving away from and what are you moving toward, I think when we start talking about compliance, we need to talk about it the way lots of other industries do. It's a badge of honor. When you have a compliant school, it's something that gives a sense of safety to the staff, to the families. And although families may be looking at your school for your curriculum, the ratios, how beautiful your buildings are, all it takes is one situation where a child has been put at risk, where the very first thing that they think about is safety.
Yeah.
The curriculum, the building, and all that other stuff just suddenly went down lower. So my encouragement is that when we look at buy-in, it's start talking about how compliance is actually a positive thing. And it starts even with how you communicate on your website. So because I don't own a school, but I work with owners and administrators, I get to go to all the websites and see how they're communicating about safety, how they're communicating about what safety means. And I should be able to walk into that school, and whether it's safety or compliance, anybody that I bump into, like the NASA person, what do you do? What does compliance mean to you? Somebody should have an answer for that, and it would be different based on their lens. So compliance really needs the PR job of something positive, but also it goes beyond safety and regulations. It goes into branding. It goes into your quality metrics. It goes into, we're hearing a lot about insurance and how important it is to be compliant for renewal eligibility. So we kind of look at compliance on a broader scale, but it does start with the buy-in. And it does start with your messaging around how are you communicating the importance of it.
Yeah, I really, really like that. And I'm gonna throw something your way, Julie, because one of the things I've been studying recently, and because of your background and the book that you wrote, I'm gonna throw this your direction. So I love what Lynn is saying here, and I think all of us could agree that we learn more from our failures than we do maybe from our successes. I think probably everyone has heard that message over and over and over again. So we like to say that when you get a violation, say thank you. You just told me where I need to focus more of my time, energy, and effectiveness, and so that I can zero in on that and make it a gift. So turn around the mindset and you're probably going to succeed. So Julie, if I were to ask you, what are some of the things you would measure about how a compliance violation might be impacting the financial side of the business? What would you say? What would be some of those things that you might suggest an owner look at?
Well, I think there's quite a few different financial sort of setbacks or things that can occur from non-compliances. For example, I don't know if you're all familiar with what's happening in the insurance industry with childcare. So if you just look at that piece of it, non-compliances is equaling non-renewal. I mean, for us, that is an absolute disaster because we can't run our businesses without a certificate of insurance. It's a DHHS requirement. So, I mean, at the very base of the conversation, it can be detrimental, right? If you're looking at non-compliances for safety, of course, the community is now very well aware that they can go on websites and review all the non-compliances that you have been adding up. We just heard that if a director is from a school and then goes to another school, leaves one location to go to another and work for someone else, and they have a lot of non-compliances under them, they're actually not renewing insurances based on that now. So, I mean, this is just becoming a humongous issue with folks that are either trying to sell or trying to buy new locations. Staffing is already tight, as we all know. It is, stressful to find new directors, and then adding on these non-compliance issues and how they affect us. I mean, all of that affects operational efficiency. All of that affects bottom line, which is our net profit. Quality is affected by net profit. So, I mean, everything is connected. And when you're going to go sell your schools, especially if you're going to sell to private equity, that is a huge piece that they're just going to look at right away, right? How are you doing in the space? What is your reputation? What is your non-compliance list? Or hopefully it's not a list, but sometimes it is. And yeah, I think in general, all of those things can affect operational efficiencies, which then, obviously affect revenue. That affects salaries, that affects whether or not your school is going to be sustainable in the future. So yes, non-compliance is a direct relationship with functional ability, operational efficiency, and financial status for sure.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to do a myth busting challenge. Implementing systems and tools to manage compliance and risk is too expensive and complex for small childcare centers. So let's go around the room and let's bust up this myth, shall we? So Vernon, I'm gonna start with you because I read your book and it was wonderful. I highly recommend it to anyone. Never Waste a Crisis. What would you say? What would be the first thing you would say to bust the myth of managing compliance and risk is too expensive? Finding, or purchasing a system or a tool for that is too expensive.
I would say it's equally important, if not more important, with the small program. Because we are in an environment now where it's not, we tell people that we're compliant. It's not enough to tell an inspector, oh, but that's not normally how we do it. Oh, but that's always done that. They want to see evidence of it. They want to see evidence that it's been done. And the smaller you are, the harder it is to show that evidence. And so I would say that means it's even more mandatory to have something that's structured so it's easily accessible.
Yeah, I agree with you. Who wants to go next? Anybody else got a thought on busting that myth about it being too expensive? Julie, go for it.
I love talking about money. So at the end of the day, it is too expensive to not do it. Like, that's people right. Don't understand that really the expensive part is not having compliance, right? Because all those things I just talked about, in addition to a slew of others that cost you possibly your license, your insurance renewals, and or if they're going to renew you, they'll be more expensive based on that history, lawsuits. I mean, we can add up all of the expenses that will come out of it being too expensive to have non-compliant or compliance.
And I'm going to add the people piece into it because I love people. So it's too expensive and not to do it because of the people piece. If you don't have your people that are following a compliance system, then your directors are going to have to go back in and retrain the teachers. Your regional directors are going to have to go back in. It's going to go up to the line to where the most expensive people in your company are wasting much more time than they should because they're not using a system. It turns into people that are doing it, not a system. So it's far, far, far more expensive not to have a system because then you're using your people, which are your biggest, best, and most expensive asset.
So you're saying highest and best use of the time of your people rather than having them train, retrain, 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 right? Yeah.
Yes.
And then Lynn, from an operational perspective, I feel like there's something inside of you that wants to come out about busting this myth.
Well, I agree with everything that's been said. And my first question when somebody would say it's too expensive, I would say, define expensive. What are we talking about here? And I would imagine when they give that number, it's not expensive. The cost of not doing it can be easily identified. So, one of the exercises we go through is a little bit of a return on investment calculator. How are you doing it today? What is it costing you? The time and motion, the documentation, the evidence that that Vernon was talking about is vital. So the costs of not doing it quickly outweigh whatever investment you're looking at. I know how much one place is, and let's say per location, there's certainly savings around that. But if a single location is spending somewhere around $12 to $15 to $1,800, depending upon if they have additional services, that's nothing compared to what the cost would be. The cost of a citation, you might not be getting a fine, but the cost of being in violation is brand, is reputation, is good news travels fast, bad news travels even faster, and people are quick to tell the bad news story. So I would say that it starts with what is your thought about cost, and very quickly, let's look at the other side of the ledger. What would it cost you if you were not compliant, and how can you control the narrative by making this investment?
Yeah. Well,
I want to add something real quick to what Lynn said about controlling the narrative, because by having a compliance system in place, you can also control the narrative on the positive way. If something negative does happen, like you said, bad news travels fast. But if you have evidence that you've checked all the boxes and you've done all of the things, then it quickly will combat that negative attention that you're getting.
Yeah, I think you're right. Could it be a market distinction? Could it be turned into a way to demonstrate that you've gone above and beyond the call of duty with having that evidentiary background to show parents all that you do in order to meet those standards, right? So couldn't it be a market differentiator? What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Also for insurance, like Julie was saying, when you have that compliance system in place, you can show insurance companies, look, this is all that we're doing compared to, over here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And whenever you can say you're ahead of a problem, it didn't come find you, that you're ahead of it, that is a reassuring message. So that's part of controlling the narrative.
Yeah, I agree with you. All right, so we're going to do a lightning round. How often should compliance training be conducted in early care and education organizations? So we're going to go through this really quick. Rachel, how often do you think it should be done?
So I believe that training is not the answer. I believe it's mentoring and coaching. So I think that people need to learn what they need to learn through training, but then it needs to be ongoing through mentoring and coaching. So it needs to be something that's continual, and it's organic, and it's not just here's what the manual says to do, but always, always, always.
Yep. Go, Vernon. You're next.
I think it's something, I completely agree with Rachel that you can't depend on formal training, but I think you do have to have formal training. And I think that if there are people out in the market now that are still having those monthly staff meetings, that are standing up there like a minister behind the pulpit preaching about people being late or not turning in their activity plans on time, or gathering on the playground, we got to move beyond that, and your monthly staff meetings need to be a place where we discuss and we celebrate compliance and trainings and gathering information.
Yep, go ahead, Lynn.
I would say as needed, as was always pointed out, there's nothing like a teachable moment. So when there is a situation that really says we need to address this not only with the individual, but if they experienced it, others will also experience that. And then from another lens, if you think about some of the best practices that we teach in the industry about let your staff understand financials. Let's use that as an example. So if they're understanding financials, let your staff understand what a licensing inspection report looks like. Many of them have probably never seen it. So it doesn't mean like that's a once a month type thing, but it should be part of the discussion, which promotes what we were talking about earlier, which is what's the why behind compliance, getting the buy-in. When you understand the why and the buy-in, you have motivation so that they're like, oh, why does that active supervision count? I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All 6 were there. Well, were they the right 6 that were coming in and out or moving classrooms? And why is that a big deal? And you don't want to use fear factor, but there are some realities of what happens when you don't do that. So I would say on demand, situational, but then with intentionality, pick a theme that helps teach about an aspect of the business that you can showcase in reviewing a licensing visit. And I might even offer do one on your competitor so they can see what happens. It's just a great tool to teach them what it entails.
Yep. And we'll round it out with you, Julie.
Well, all of you did such a great job. I don't know what I have left. So I would say I'm in agreement with everyone's comments. We believe in something called Kaizen, which is just fostering continuous improvement, right? And so as long as we're going towards continuous improvement every day, I think real life examples are super important. I think in the moment teaching, having positive reinforcement around compliance and why, and teaching them, like Lynn said, why are we really doing this? Because they're not going to do something if they don't really understand what they're doing this for. I think just creating a culture of compliance. Like, I feel like that's just something that we need to foster on all levels. And then I think just empowering our people, to take ownership of that compliance and helping them understand why this has to be a mission-driven culture.
Yeah, I love that. I think you all are on the same page with this. So I'm going to just open it up. Anyone want to share how you've conditioned in something that your team attended training on, whether it's licensing, compliance, or accreditation or something else, but you conditioned it in by coaching or mentoring? Just an example of that, a real life example would probably really push that home.
We just did a training, and it's going to sound kind of unconventional and weird because that's who we are. But we took our parent surveys and our staff surveys, and we use those as we edit our scorecards every quarter. So we took those and we had a staff training meeting on that. And we made a whole big training on, my husband likes to say, don't be dumb. And it's pretty simple, like just don't do it. Don't be dumb. Because we had 4 teenagers. So anyways, we did the whole training and it was called Don't Be Dumb. And it was all about basically what the parent and staff feedback was of things that should have not been done, that were dumb. So we did a whole thing around that, and it just made it funny and fun, and people contributed a lot more openly because it opened up this sense of vulnerability, and we were able to pull and add things to the scorecards based on that.
I love it. That is a really great real life example. Anybody else want to try to follow that real life example? We're leaving Rachel hanging out there, huh?
Definitely wasn't like that.
Okay.
The only example I'll give is Lynn brought up is learning and teaching in context. I can tell you that many years ago, longer than I care to admit, I was a single site owner director, 250 kids, 55 staff, had a bad licensing inspection, or excuse me, bad sanitation inspection. And I may or may have not lost my mind and really just showed out, right? And my staff really worked hard because we were going to have to be re-inspected, and I'd never had that before. And we were going to have to be re-inspected, and they came back. The day they came back, everybody knew that we had been re-inspected because they were in all the classrooms and left. And such a learning from one of my staff members. At the end of the day, I didn't say anything because we had passed. We were good. I didn't get the part of you got to share when it's great, you got to share when it's tough, right? You know what I mean? You've got to, and that's so especially important with today's workforce, because I had a staff member that came up and said, "How did we do?" And I said, "Oh, we did fine." And she said, "Well, that would have been nice to have known because we
Yeah.
surely knew when we didn't do well. So it would have been nice to know when we did well." And I was like, "Good. I'm so glad I'm in the right mindset to receive that today." You can compare
That
that
goes
to
back to the old adage, coaching up, coaching down, and
yeah.
coaching sideways, right? We all need that. And maybe it's less lonely at the top if we make ourselves available to hear all sides of that
Mhm.
coin, maybe. Anybody else, Julie or Lynn, you guys have a depth of experience. If you've got a story, share it.
Not so much a story, but like I really love what Vernon said because we believed in responsive adjustments, right? Like let's respond as adjustments are needed. Let's get buy-in as they're needed. And one big thing we didn't talk about on the earlier question was the roadblocks and the oh, we can't do that because or that's not going to work because when you're doing those responsive adjustments, it's really important to not just make these compliance rules that you feel are going to work because sometimes it can't work in the instances that they're in. Maybe it's the way the classroom runs or the way that they run their class or whatever, right? And so to really take into account those responsive adjustments in the moment and ask for feedback, right, from the team, like, hey, how can we do this better? What do you think will work for you? I just think we didn't really talk about the resistance to change sometimes and why why our team would resist things sometimes that we try to implement. And it's just really important, I think, for owners. Like we had almost 400 staff or team members. We want to make sure that this is going to work across the board, right? And so if we're just making it from our office or from our point of view, sometimes those 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 blockages would come up and we need solutionists, right? So we would always say, okay, well, what do you all think would work? Let's get together here as a team and figure out how to get this to be compliant in the best way for all of us, right? And so I
Yeah.
think we didn't really talk about that piece, but I think it comes up, right? There's resistance and change, and we can't ignore
100%.
that as owners.
Yeah, 100%. And Lynn, I think you and I both probably would love to chime in and piggyback on what Julie just said. So I'll give you the floor first.
Okay, so I was going to bring it from a slightly different perspective of the buy-in. One area of compliance that we might want to take into consideration when a staff says, I did it because mom, dad, caregiver asked me to do it. And they feel like they're doing the right thing because the parent of the child said, I want them to have the tethered bink in their bed. Well, that's not safe sleep habits or practices. So even that situational teaching about even if the parent is right in this situation, they're not right because. So that's part of the buy-in and the why. So that was a real life situation of how that was handled. And once the
Yeah,
parent understood why, they stopped doing it. And it was
yeah,
fun.
that's a fantastic story because what we can do at home, we can't necessarily do in a care environment, right? Like
Right.
there's just the difference, and explaining it both to the staff and to the parent is really important. So I'm glad you brought that up, Julie. One final question around that. How have any of you experienced this? Because it came up recently to me personally, was a owner was almost kind of blaming licensing for citing them on a situation where she felt like they were partially compliant, just not fully compliant. So imagine a scenario where they had, let's say, half of the work done. So they were half compliant, half not. And trying to help that person see that, you still have to take responsibility. That's still out of compliance. What would you say back? Have you had that experience? Have you helped your team understand that even if we're only this much off the mark, we're still out of compliance?
Yes, I think that's a great teachable moment because that shows you the gap and you
Mhm.
learn in the gap. So if you're almost there, you're not there. So we
Mhm.
need to figure out what happened in the gap. And
Mhm.
then that's where we need to work and that's where we need to focus so that next time we are all the way there. And what you're going to learn in this gap, you're going to be able to teach somebody else. And that's the ultimate level of mastery is when you're able to teach it to somebody else.
Yeah.
So it's a great teaching moment.
Yeah. All right, let's move along. So today, we have been exploring some critical findings from our compliance and risk survey, including health practices, safety protocols, and strategies for improving buy-in. Let's go around the room and do some final thoughts. Maybe one word to describe the future of compliance in early learning. So who wants to start? Who's a master with words?
I'll go. Not that
Go,
I'm a
Lynn.
master with words, but I think Julie actually took my word in another question, but she said mission critical. And I think compliance is truly mission critical, but if I can't use that word, then I would say non-negotiable, because it's really not negotiable. Being compliant is your brand, it's your message, it's safety, it's for the staff, it's for the children, it's for the family. So to me, mission critical and non-negotiable.
Love it. Love it. Who wants to go next? One word for the future of compliance. Go ahead, Julie.
I will just say essential. Like, I just don't think there's an option for it.
Yeah, I agree. So we've got mission critical, non-negotiable, and essential. What else?
I'll go next. All right. So why doesn't really make sense, but so we're going to have two words: the why. The why is vital with today's workforce, with the customers, with the parents that we're serving today. You know, with the directors that are leading our programs, we have to step away from it's us against them.
Right.
So many directors run their program and try to get compliance from their staff by saying things like, that's what corporate wants. That's what the owner wants. The state says we can't do that, right? And it's not, it's about getting buy-in and taking ownership of where we are. And even when Lynn brought up the binky, I think that was Velcroed or tied to the side of the crib or whatever, tethered, yeah, that's the word. You know, I will tell you, I believe in 90% of the childcare programs, a director or teacher would have said, that's not allowed, that's a violation, and not given the why. And it poisons our customers.
Yes.
On why maybe the childcare isn't the best choice. Maybe a home, maybe a nanny would be better. Well, but even if you do a home, even if you have a nanny in your home, you don't need that tethered to a crib because it's unsafe. So we have to educate them on the why. We all know the state comes up with crazy, rules, but many times there are legitimate reasons behind those rules. So I would say the why is vital for today's workforce and for the customers that we're serving today.
Well, and Vernon, you just hit the nail on the head. We're in the business not just of child care, but early care and education, right? So if we're educating and we are educators, isn't the onus and the responsibility on us to educate the why behind? So I love that you brought that up. I think it's a perfect word. So Rachel, I think you're rounding us out in the end. So we've got mission critical, non-negotiable, essential, the whys, and rounding it out.
I'm more fluffy in, unicorns and rainbows. So good. My word is joy, just because what I initially thought of was it's an antidote to burnout, because we are like, you have to do this because licensing says so. You have to do this because this is what policy says, or the budget won't allow, and all of this. And it sucks the life and the joy out of what we do and why we do it, like what Vernon said. And if we get systems in place and we're compliant with all of them, it just becomes a machine and it becomes automatic. So it gives us more time to bring back the joy of childcare and the joy of why we do what we do. So mine is joy.
I love it. I think that's perfect, because why do anything if there isn't joy in it, right? And
I'm not coming.
I think it ties right back to what Lynn started us off with, which is it's a badge of honor. We can take pride in our roles. If you don't have pride in your role, in your I mean, if we're going to spend this amount of time away from home, away from our families, right, in work, in career, shouldn't we have some joy? Shouldn't we have some fun? Shouldn't we have some pride? Because money isn't everything. And it doesn't matter how much money you make. If you don't have joy and you can't take any pride in it, what's the point? Right? So I'm curious, as we've talked about this and we're kind of, rounding it all out, is there a thing you would share with new owners or directors or those that have gone before us and how things maybe have shifted from the past to where we are today? Vernon keeps kind of alluding to it, that the workforce is a little bit different. Everything seems to be speeding up. Yeah, the workforce is quite different. They need to understand the why behind everything. They want to feel like they're making an impact and that they're valuable. And there's just a whole lot more meat to that than just a hierarchical business organization issuing orders, right? So as we kind of transform into that, what are the stories? What are the learnings? What are the books? What are the inspiring moments from each of your careers that help you kind of cross that bridge into how we are operating now over in the past? How have you changed? I bet you have. I bet you have. What are the things that you can think about right now from your own journey that were pivotal moments, transformational moments, where the light bulb went off and you went, wait, we can do this together?
Yeah, I would say years ago, when I was multi-site, realizing that I had to get buy-in from my directors. They had to understand the finances. And so, of course, I really thought I was doing something, and we started printing off, before our leadership meetings, we would started printing off our financials for each individual location so that they would understand where they were. And that seemed to make a little bit of a bump. It seemed to help just a little bit, that they all understood. We also shared it with the assistant directors when they would come at their meetings, at different meetings. But I will say that when I really saw the biggest change happen was when I began to share everybody's financials with everybody. That was when the whole competitiveness, the whole reality, the whole understanding other people are going to see this. And it wasn't about threats. It wasn't about, I'm going to show everybody, it was about, we want a healthy company. And it wasn't about me driving a new Escalade or whatever. It was about being able to maintain the quality we were, improve the quality that we're trying to get to where we're going. And in today's world, it's about keeping up with the pay that is expected from our current workforce. And I unfortunately, I am seeing owners maintaining the pay from the grants that they gave out during COVID, maintaining their pay by having less resources, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's putting them at a really unhealthy place, because you have to have money. You have to have money in the event of something bad goes wrong. Because I have, unfortunately, I say unfortunately, but fortunately, because I wouldn't be where I am today if it weren't for the crises that I have survived. But I have been the person that went to sleep at night with a healthy program full of children and staff, and woke up the next morning and it was literally gone. And I had more payroll coming. I had insurance coming. I had bills coming. Where was that money going to come from? I was able to squeak out the payroll that I owed them. And that was it, right? And I do not want to see, and it's been one of my passions, is I don't want to see other owners squeak around like that. It's dangerous. It's dangerous. We have to have reserves.
Yeah. I would say that was all of your experiences shared in your book were absolutely, I couldn't put it down, because they were real, they were raw, they were perfect examples of things I've heard every childcare owner and director go through at some point. But going back to what you just said, sounds to me like when you started sharing the financials of the entire business across the team, it actually worked to the benefit. It created positive peer pressure to join together. And how do we make this even better, and raised everyone's standards? Don't you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes we're our own enemies, right? So what's another example of a transformational moment in your career path that really helped you and those around you, your team? Because I can tell all four of you love the people you work with and want them to be empowered and raised up. So what are some other stories around that?
I, I, I would say that mine was, I think during the pandemic is when it all hit for me, because I was just on this hamster wheel of doing it all myself. Like people would break something, I would go back in and fix it, or, whatever, instead of having systems for them to rely on so that those things don't happen. And also the buy-in, like Vernon said, then it becomes the directors who are encouraging them to do these things, and the teachers, lead teachers, that are encouraging their assistant teachers to follow the compliance. And then it becomes this culture of accountability, and everybody wants everybody to do better. And like you said, they're going to get their own bonuses. It's not competing with each other, it's competing with their self, but it's each other helping them, and it's for the benefit of the schools. It's going to
Yeah.
make the schools a better quality environment. It's going to make our culture a better culture to work in and play in every single day. And when that actually happened and I could step back and look at it, it was just completely transformational, like you said. So then we were able to focus on other things and, growing. And recently, like I like what he said about the competition, we are now making our scorecards public. So everybody in the company can see everybody's score, because it does give that healthy competition. Like, how'd you get a 91%? What did you do? Well, and that's when we talk about the gap. Well, here's the gap. Let me help you. Let me show you what I did. So it just becomes this complete culture of accountability and compliance.
Yeah, I love that. That's exactly what I could only hope for as a former person in the industry, that is exactly the fire that's getting lit. Because you have one process, everybody's doing it. If somebody finds the magic bullet, we all want the magic bullet, right? We all want it. Tell me what that secret sauce is, I'll do it too. So I think you're spot on, all of you. Anything to add, Lynn? It looked like you were kind of getting ready to piggyback on.
I'm nodding my head with all of this. I would say, if we're going to talk about the creating a environment where we all want to level up, and it sometimes is perceived as competition, but it's really, what can I learn from another set of eyes?
Mm-hmm.
So it might be that somebody else comes into your classroom, you switch cover, whatever we need to do to stay in ratio, but a second set of eyes so that you can see something, or ask a trusted somebody else that you would trust, to give a second set of eyes. So that would be one thing. But I also, as I was listening to all of this and what was transformative, one of my core values and my company core values is curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever I'm looking at best practice, I go outside of the environment that I'm in. So I step outside of early education and I say, what's going well when it comes to compliance in healthcare, in manufacturing, in insurance, in banking, and then learn from those, because we might not be running around with forklifts, but there are best practices that we absolutely can follow. And again, it goes back to, compliance is not a punitive thing. When you look at the OSHA guidelines, many programs, depending upon the state and if they're national, actually have some OSHA responsibilities, which we haven't even touched on that. But let's learn from those who are doing it well and have that. If any of you are old enough to remember the good housekeeping stamp of approval, like you've got the seal of approval. But we can learn from outside of our industry. And I realize we're all busy, but that was a mindset shift for me when I started to see all of the other industries that are doing this well, and what can we borrow from those practices.
Yeah, I think that is a gem. I think that is literally a gold nugget we could spend an entire episode on, Lynn, is stepping away. Rachel talked about have the systems in place so the business is running, and being able to step back, look at the business, and then say, okay, I've got an area I need to focus on. Does the answer have to come from my own peer group, or might it come from outside of my normal group? So I think that was an excellent pathway to power. Go ahead, Julie.
I think all of this is awesome. Just a quick ending, I think, to this question for me would be, for me, a big, huge sort of revelation was I need to be a better leader, right? And so I had to be a different person to get what I needed done in the right way. I guess it became where I was like, okay, what do I need to do as a leader to cause this culture of continuous improvement? And so that meant also continuous improvement of myself. And so I think a lot of owners forget that it's important that we start with us as well, and be a good model for that continuous improvement. And we always talked about something like, we didn't use the gap, instead we used the opportunity. And so we kind of changed the language around, like, we're not missing out on something, we just have the opportunity to improve something. And that helped us. In our company, I felt like it was really well received to have opportunity. And then the other piece was, it was about a collective whole. At the end of the day, like, we cannot operate autonomously in anything. In the world, we have to be a piece of something larger. And so being able to be a part of the collective environment that creates continuous improvement and positive change, I think, is just the way we need to look at everything now. Yeah.
So Julie, I feel like you just reached into my brain, because I have this vision, and I'll just share something recent that I came across was a Whitney Houston snippet. It was just a snippet of something she had done, and it talked about the way she could expand her lungs in order to carry that note the way that she could. And so, hearkening towards something like that, how would you advise leaders, owners, people that are trying to go to the next level? They need to invest in their own development, right? Continually expand and improve themselves. Where could they start? What are some things? Is it books? What did you do tactfully? Like, what are those little things?
I mean, I just put a lot of effort into continuous improvement of myself, whether it was reading books. I mean, I read a ton of books. I don't know. I read 4 books at once. I think my ADD depends on what I'm liking in each book right now. But continuous improvement. So whether it's podcasting in my car, I also believe in continuous improvement for my family and my kids. So like my podcasting in my car, they're all listening, right? They're gaining all this knowledge around me. It's not just me. I feel like we need this collective continuous improvement. And so podcasting, books, I go to many conferences, and I've gone to everything I could get my hands on that I could learn to be a better leader, learn to be a better person, a better human. It was always about, like, how can I be the best human in this situation? And that also is important, right? With your team, to be relatively understanding, to have empathy, to understand why things maybe aren't working. I know we have to be like, everyone says don't be a boss, but there are instances where we need to be in that role. But leadership and continuous improvement through so many things. And the great thing is, right now we have the internet. We have free resources. If people say, oh, I can't because it's costly, that's just BS. Like, it's a lie. I mean, we have so much available information today. You can go on anything, literally. If you spend 100 hours on it, you can be an expert. So I think that that's not an appropriate roadblock, right? And so just do what you can to continue to pour into yourself so you can pour into others.
Yeah, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. Love it. Love it. Final thoughts then. Vernon, Lynn, final thoughts.
Becky Bailey taught me. I was lucky enough when I was working on my master's that Becky Bailey was one of my instructors. I love to tell people that I knew Becky Bailey before she was Becky Bailey. But anyway, she taught me whatever you focus on most, you get more of.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you're talking about Joy or Rachel or continuous learning or play or whatever, making money, whatever, you're going to get more of.
Where focus goes, energy flows, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I can't imagine a better group for this. I would love to do this once a week. There's just so much out of this, so much wisdom that I wish I would have had 35 years ago. So I'm certain that this podcast will be listened to by a lot of people that'll be very, very grateful to hear from each of you, because you have such a depth of experience. So thank you. Thank you to each of you that you took the time to be here and to join us on our podcast. And we hope that anyone listening out there is enjoying the Excellence in Childcare podcast. And if you want to reach out to these folks, we'll be linking their bios in our notes section. And you can certainly find this podcast and any of our guides on the One Place Online website under resources. So thank you again, all of you, for being here. We sincerely are so grateful to each of you. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.